At Thanksgiving dinner, my dad leaned toward his mistress and whispered, "Send your son to change the locks at her penthouse." My stepbrother got straight up and left. 30 minutes later, he came back sweating, his clothes torn, and screamed, "Mom, we need to leave right now." My name is Elise Marchetti. I'm 37. I close real estate titles for a living, and the penthouse my father was talking about is mine. Not inherited, not gifted. I bought it myself 6 years ago for $915,000. Closed the deal at my own desk, filed the deed under my own name, and paid it off 2 years early because I don't like owing anyone anything. My grandmother lives there with me. She was sitting 3 seats down from me at that table, eating cranberry sauce off a paper plate because my stepmother thinks the good china is for people who stay married. I heard the whisper because I was refilling water glasses and I happened to be standing right behind my father's chair. He didn't check who was there. He never does. 12 years of watching him lean into Denise Holt like she was still the secret and not the wife has taught me that my father believes low volume equals invisible. It doesn't. I heard every word. Send your son to change the locks at her penthouse. Her penthouse, not the place, not that condo downtown. Her penthouse. He knew exactly whose name was on the deed. He said it anyway. There was a version of my father who taught me how to change a tire on the shoulder of Route 9 when I was 16. Quick pause before we continue. I'm Clara, the woman behind this channel. I write these stories because I love that little moment when strangers from different places end up feeling the same thing. If this one already pulled you in, stay with me. It goes deeper from here. There was a version of my father who taught me how to change a tire on the shoulder of Route 9 when I was 16. Kneeling in the gravel next to me, instead of just doing it himself, saying, "You don't ever wait for someone else to know how to take care of what's yours, Hoy Elise. You learn it so nobody can hold it over you." I believed him. I built an entire life on that sentence. My own credit, my own closing table, my own name on my own deed. And some nights, I still can't decide whether he meant it back then or whether it was just a thing fathers say before they find someone easier to lean toward. Tyler didn't hesitate. That's the part that told me this wasn't spontaneous. My stepbrother is 26, works construction scheduling for a contractor his mother dated for a while, and he stood up from the table so fast his napkin slid off his lap onto the floor, and nobody but me watched it happen. He said something about needing air. He took his jacket off the hook by the door. He was gone before the sweet potatoes made their second lap around the table. I sat there and did the math out loud in my head, because that's what I do. That's the job. 20 minutes to drive from my father's house in Hartwell to my building downtown if you catch the lights right. 5 minutes to talk his way past Marcus at the front desk, who has known me for 6 years and would never let a stranger up, but Tyler isn't a stranger. Tyler has been at 3 of my birthday dinners. Tyler knows my building's name. Maybe 5 more minutes to find a locksmith who doesn't ask enough questions. I put my water pitcher down on the sideboard because my hands weren't steady enough to keep pouring. "Something wrong, honey?" my stepmother asked, not looking up from her phone. "Just tired," I said. My grandmother caught my eye across the table. Rose Whitfield doesn't miss much either. She'd stopped chewing. I excused myself to the bathroom and called the building instead. Marcus didn't pick up. He does a walkthrough of the loading dock around this time on holidays. I know his schedule because I helped negotiate his overtime rate 2 Thanksgivings ago when the board tried to cut it. I called my own cell forwarding number, the one that rings the unit's landline, which I only keep because my grandmother refuses to fully trust cell phones. It rang 4 times and went to the machine. That's normal. She turns the ringer down when she naps. I stood in my father's pink-tiled guest bathroom with the fan running so no one would hear me, and I texted her. "Grandma, everything okay?" No answer. I told myself she was asleep. I told myself Tyler needed air, like he said, and would come back with red eyes from the cold and nothing more. I have built an entire career on believing what documents say instead of what people say, and right then I was doing the opposite. believing what people say instead of checking the one thing that actually mattered, which was whether my grandmother was safe in her own home. I went back to the table. My father was carving the turkey, like nothing had happened, telling the story about the fishing trip from 2019 that he tells every single year. And Denise was laughing at the right places, like she always does, one beat late, like she's watching for cues instead of actually listening. I sat across from the empty chair where Tyler's plate was still full and getting cold, and I counted candles on the centerpiece instead of eating. 28 minutes after he left, the front door of my father's house opened so hard it hit the wall. Tyler was standing in the entryway with his jacket half off one shoulder, the collar of his shirt ripped down to the second button, a long red scrape across his forearm that hadn't started bleeding yet but was going to. He was breathing like he'd run the last block. His shoes were untied. There was a smear of dirt across his cheek, like he'd gone down on one knee somewhere and gotten back up fast. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I had never heard from him, not once in 12 years, not even when his own father skipped his high school graduation. "Mom, we need to leave right now." Denise was up out of her chair so fast it tipped backward. "Tyler, what happened? Are you hurt? We need to go. Now, get your coat." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at my father. And my father, for one full second, one second I will remember for the rest of my life, looked scared. Not concerned, not confused. Scared, the specific scared of a man who ordered something and is now finding out the order went wrong. "What did you do?" I said. I wasn't asking Tyler. I was looking at my father when I said it, and the whole table went quiet enough that I heard the oven timer ticking down in the kitchen. "Nothing," my father said, too fast, straightening his tie like it needed straightening. "Tyler probably just—" "There's a dog," Tyler said, still to his mother, still not looking at me. "And Warren, there's someone in there. There's a woman in there. She opened the door on us, and the dog came out of nowhere, and We need a lawyer, Mom. We need to go home right now." I was already standing. I don't remember deciding to stand. My chair was on the floor behind me, and I had my car keys out of my purse, and my grandmother was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, her face gone the color of the tablecloth, and she said the only thing she said that whole minute, quiet, almost to herself. "Bruno," she said. "That's my Bruno." Bruno is 105 pounds of retired police K9, a Belgian Malinois my grandmother adopted 18 months ago from a program that places dogs too old for active duty with seniors who live alone. Except she doesn't live alone. She lives with me, and I only agreed to let her keep him because the building allows large breeds on the top 2 floors, and because after what happened to her purse-snatched neighbor on Bellamy Street, I wanted exactly one thing standing between my grandmother and the world, something that couldn't be talked out of doing its job. Grandma called me at 6:40 and said she was staying in tonight, I said, mostly to myself, doing the math again. Faster this time, ugly this time. She's home. She was home the whole time. My father said my name. I didn't answer him. I had my coat in one hand and my phone in the other, dialing the unit landline again, then my grandmother's cell, then 911 information for the precinct near my building because I couldn't remember the direct non-emergency line, and I needed someone who could tell me if a call had already come in from that address. Behind me, I heard Denise dragging Tyler toward the coat closet, heard my father's chair scrape back, heard him say something low and fast to her that I didn't catch and didn't need to, because I already knew the shape of it. Handle this. Get him calm. Don't let her hear the rest. I was in my car with the engine running before I let myself feel anything at all. My hands were shaking on the wheel at the first red light on Hartwell Road. 20 minutes from my building, 20 minutes from my grandmother, 20 minutes from finding out exactly what my father had sent into my own front door. And the last thing I heard before I put the phone on speaker and pulled out of the driveway was my grandmother's voice, still ringing in my ears from the dining room. Calm in the particular way she gets calm right before she isn't calm at all. "Elise," she'd said, catching my sleeve as I passed her chair. "Don't you drive fast and get yourself hurt over this. I've got the deed, I've got the leash, and I've got that dog's bite report from the department still in the drawer where you keep the important things. She'd looked past me at my father, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Your father is about to find out I read everything you ever asked me to keep safe. I didn't understand yet what she meant by all of it. I understood the dog, the deed, the drawer. I didn't yet understand the part that would matter most. The yellowed piece of paper sitting 3 folders behind the deed, a power of attorney my father talked me into signing when I was 31 and flying to Singapore for 8 months of work. Limited, temporary, expired now for 14 months. The paper he was apparently still showing to locksmiths like it meant something. I didn't know yet that he'd tried this once before, quietly, weeks earlier, and the building had already said no. I only knew that my grandmother was alone, with a dog trained to bite and hold, that my stepbrother had walked out of that apartment bleeding, and that somewhere in the 20 minutes between my father's house and mine, I was going to have to decide exactly how much of what I knew I was ready to prove. My phone rang. Unknown number, downtown area code. I answered it on the first ring. Ms. Marchetti? A man's voice, calm, official. This is Officer Reyes. I'm out at your building on Delancey. Your neighbor called it in. I need to ask you a few questions about a possible attempted break-in. I'm her granddaughter, I said, running a yellow light on Hartwell Road with my phone wedged against my shoulder. I'm the owner. I'm 10 minutes out. Is she hurt? Is my grandmother hurt? She's fine, ma'am. She's shaken up, but she's fine. She's got quite a dog. Officer Reyes had the flat, unbothered voice of someone who'd already decided this was a minor call. An old woman and a barking dog and a scared kid who ran off. Nothing more. Your neighbor across the hall heard the commotion and called it in. By the time I got here, the male subject was already gone. Your grandmother says she knows him. She does. So do I. I need you to stay until I get there. We'll be here. I hung up and called the one other person who needed to hear this before I walked into that building, and my face gave anything away. My colleague Priya, who runs closings 2 desks down from mine, and who has spent 11 years pulling recorded documents out of county systems faster than anyone I know. I need you to do something for me tonight, off the clock, and I'll owe you, I said. Pull every filing tied to my unit at 4400 Delancey since August. Every single one. And I need the full history on a power of attorney, my name as principal, filed with the county recorder in 2019. Elise, it's Thanksgiving. I know. I need it tonight. She didn't ask why. That's the kind of friend you keep. Delancey Street was quiet the way downtown gets quiet on holidays. String lights up in the restaurant windows. Nobody on the sidewalks. There was a squad car parked crooked in the loading zone out front, lights off. And I left my own car half in a fire lane because I didn't have it in me to find real parking. Marcus was standing just inside the lobby doors, arms crossed, talking to a second officer, and his face when he saw me through the glass told me more than either of them had on the phone. He looked furious on my behalf. He held the door. Ms. Marchetti, I am so sorry. I was doing the dock walkthrough. I wasn't at the desk more than 15 minutes. Not your fault, Marcus. Who let him up? Nobody let him up on my watch. He's got a fob history from being your guest before. 3 visits logged since March, all with you present. Tonight, he used it alone. First time, it's all in the system, time-stamped, I already pulled it for the officer. That detail landed somewhere behind my ribs and stayed there. A fob history. A record of every single time Tyler Holt had entered my building, time-stamped, dated, sitting in a database that didn't care who anyone's father was. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt longer than it ever had in 6 years of living there. I came around the corner into the hallway, and the first thing I saw was the door to my own unit standing open. The frame around the lock scarred pale where something had been pried. Wood exposed in 2 long gouges, like claw marks from a crowbar or a Slim Jim. There was a second uniformed officer crouched near the threshold with a small flashlight. And past him, in my own front hall, my grandmother was sitting upright in the wingback chair I keep by the coat closet. a police blanket around her shoulders she clearly didn't need and hadn't asked for, one hand resting flat on Bruno's back where he lay, pressed against her feet, alert, ears up, watching the officer's every move like he was still deciding whether the situation was resolved. "Grandma, I'm fine, don't hover." She waved me off with the hand that wasn't on the dog, but she gripped my wrist hard when I crouched next to her, harder than fine people grip things. "Sit down before you fall down, you look worse than I do." The living room behind her told its own story. The console table by the door was knocked sideways. The bowl I keep my extra keys in dumped across the floor, one dining chair on its side. Nothing broken that mattered, nothing taken that I could see in a fast scan. My grandmother's jewelry box on the shelf where it always sat, my laptop still on the kitchen counter, the framed photo of my mother that lives on the side table untouched. This wasn't a robbery. Nobody who breaks in to steal things spends 30 seconds fighting a dog for a bowl of spare keys and then runs. "Tell me what happened, slowly." She told it slowly, the way she tells everything, which used to drive me crazy as a kid, and which I have come, in the last 6 years of living with her, to understand is exactly how you get a story right the first time, instead of having to correct it later. She'd been in the kitchen with the radio on, not the television, because she likes the old station on Thursdays. She heard a key, an actual key, not a knock, turning in a lock that wasn't supposed to open for anyone but the two of us and Marcus's master. Bruno was up and at the door before she was even out of her chair. When the door came open 6 inches, caught on the chain I insist she keep latched even though she calls it fussy, there was a man's voice on the other side saying, low, urgent, talking to someone she couldn't see. "Just cut the chain. It's fine. My dad already cleared it with the board." "I knew that voice," my grandmother said. "I've heard that voice complain about gravy at my own table 3 Thanksgivings running. That was Tyler Holt talking, plain as anything. And I have known that boy since he was 14 years old, eating my pie and calling me Miss Rose." She'd unlatched nothing. She'd let Bruno do what 18 months of retirement hadn't trained out of him. The door came open wider when someone on the other side put a shoulder into the chain. The chain gave, and the dog went through the gap low and fast. Not at a throat. She was careful to tell the officer twice. At an arm, a jacket sleeve. The way he'd been trained for a decade to take hold of exactly one thing and not let go until told. There'd been shouting, a second voice, a man she didn't recognize telling someone to just go, forget it. The sound of a tool. A locksmith's kit, it turned out, still half open on the hallway carpet, where whoever was carrying it had dropped it and run. And then the door had swung wide with nobody holding it, and it was just her and Bruno, and an overturned bowl of keys, and the sound of someone taking the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator. "He said his father cleared it with the board," I repeated. "Not the building. The board. That's what he said. I heard it clear as my own name." I looked at the officer with the flashlight. "Did you find the kit he mentioned? A tool bag, a work order, anything with a name on it?" He held up an evidence bag, already sealed, already labeled with a case number in black marker. Inside it, folded and a little torn at one corner, where it had been stepped on, was a printed work order from a locksmith service 2 towns over, redline lock and key, with a job description that read Reiki, full unit 4001, 4400 Delancey, and beneath it, in the space marked authorized by, a name typed clean and unmistakable. Warren Marchetti. Not Tyler's name, my father's. My father had called a locksmith himself, under his own name, and sent his stepson to let the man in. "That's my father," I said, and my voice came out flatter than I expected, flatter than the moment deserved. "That's his name. He's not on my deed. He's not on anything for this unit. There's an old power of attorney, but it expired 2 years ago, It was never for this, it was for renovation contractors while I was overseas. We'll need a copy of that, the officer said, writing. And the deed. Can you get us both? Tonight, I said. Nah, I can get you both tonight. My grandmother's hand tightened on mine again. And when I looked at her, she wasn't shaking anymore. She had the particular stillness she gets right before she says something she's been holding for longer than the last hour. Elise, she said, there's something else you need to know before this officer leaves. And I should have told you months ago, instead of trying to handle it myself like some kind of fool. The second officer looked up from his notepad. I felt my stomach drop before she'd said another word, because I know that tone. I have built my entire career on that exact tone. The tone of someone who is about to tell you this isn't the first time. Your father came by the building office in September, she said, while you were at the closing in Millbrook, the big one that kept you out 3 days. He didn't come up here. He went to the management office downstairs and told them he needed to update the emergency contact and access authorization on the unit, using that same old paper, that power of attorney. The building manager called me to confirm it, because bless her, she's careful, and I told her absolutely not. That paper was for contractors 6 years ago and nothing else, and she turned him away. You never told me. I didn't want to ruin your trip over something that got handled. Her jaw was set the way it gets, when she's furious and refusing to show it. I see now that was the wrong call. He didn't stop because the answer was no the first time. He just waited, and he tried again on a night he thought I'd be the only one standing between him and that door. I stood up, and for the first time since the phone rang in my father's pink-tiled bathroom, I felt something steadier than fear settle into my chest. Fear, I realized, is what you feel when you don't know what's coming. I was starting to know exactly what was coming because I had spent 6 years of my professional life learning precisely how to read what a piece of paper says versus what a man wants it to say. And my father had just handed the county, the police, and me 3 separate documents that all said the same thing in 3 different rooms. He had tried this once quietly in September, and it hadn't worked. And tonight, at a table with his mistress's hand under his, he had decided to try it again the loud way. The way that put a dog's teeth in his stepson's arm and his own name on a work order sitting in an evidence bag on my living room floor. My phone buzzed. Priya. I stepped into the kitchen to answer it. Out of my grandmother's earshot, watching the 2 officers photograph the door frame through the pass-through window. I pulled it, Priya said. No hello. The POA. Elise, it doesn't just look expired. There's a filing attached from September 14th. A rejected request to amend the unit's authorized contact list at county records. Denied, stamped, your father's name on the request. And there's something else. He tried to file a second one 4 days ago. Also denied. Same reason both times. No current authority on file? 4 days ago, I said. 4 days before Thanksgiving. I looked back through the kitchen doorway at my grandmother, sitting straight-backed in the wing-back chair, with her hands still resting on Bruno's back, and at the torn door frame behind her, and understood that whatever my father had planned to whisper to Denise Holt at that table tonight, he had already spent 2 months building a paper trail proving exactly what he intended to do, and exactly how many times the truth had already told him no. The officers left a little after 10 with the locksmith kit bagged, the work order photographed and copied for me, and a case number written on a yellow carbon slip that Officer Reyes pressed into my hand like he already sensed I'd be the one doing most of the follow-up. My grandmother refused to go to the hospital, refused a victim advocate's card, refused everything except a second cup of tea and Bruno's head in her lap, and by 11 she was asleep in her own bed with the dog on the floor beside her, one ear still swiveling at every sound the building made settling for the night. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop open and every folder I owned spread across the granite, and I started where I always start when something doesn't add up. At the beginning, on paper, in order. 6 years ago, I was 31 years old, single, no kids, and every single person at that same Thanksgiving table told me buying a one-bedroom penthouse alone was a mistake. My Aunt Carol called it putting the cart before the horse. Her actual words, twice, at 2 different holidays. My father told me I should wait, find a partner, buy something together, build equity as a team, as if equity built alone doesn't count the same on paper. I remember exactly what I told him because I'd practiced it in the car on the way over. I make good money, I have good credit, and I am not waiting for a man to co-sign my own life. He'd laughed. Not cruelly, just the kind of laugh that means he thought I'd come around eventually. I didn't come around. I closed on $4,001 Delancey myself, $915,000, 20% down from 4 years of bonuses I'd stacked in a savings account nobody knew the balance of. The rest financed under my name only on a 15-year note I paid off 2 years ahead of schedule. I pulled the closing file up on my laptop that night. I keep a digital copy of every closing I've ever handled, my own included, because that's simply what you do in this job. You don't trust a filing cabinet with the one document that proves you own your own life. Grantee. Elise R. Marchetti, a single woman, no co-borrower, no joint tenancy, no and/or. My name alone on a deed recorded at the county in July, 6 years ago. Book and page number, right there in black and white. I printed it. I don't know why that mattered to me at midnight, but it did. I wanted to hold the paper, not just look at the screen. Then I went looking for the other document, the one that actually explained how my father's name had ended up on a locksmith's work order for my front door. And I found it exactly where I keep everything that matters. In the fireproof lockbox in my closet, 3rd folder back behind the deed and the mortgage payoff letter. A single page, notarized, dated the spring I left for 8 months in Singapore, on a consulting rotation my firm needed covered. I remembered signing it in a rush at my kitchen table with a notary my assistant had found on short notice. My flight to the airport already booked for the next morning. I read it slowly this time, the way I should have read it 6 years ago before I ever handed it to my father. Limited power of attorney. Principal, Elise R. Marchetti. Agent, Warren T. Marchetti. Scope, authority limited exclusively to coordinating and approving contractor access, invoices, and building permitted renovation work at Unit 4001, 4400 Delancey during the principal's absence. Effective date, April 3rd. Expiration, automatic, 12 months from execution, or upon principal's return to primary residence, whichever occurs first. 12 months. I'd been back in the country and living in that unit again for 5 years and 2 months. There was no reading of that paragraph, no interpretation generous enough, that gave my father authority to call a locksmith about anything, let alone rekey the entire unit while I was 30 minutes away at his own dinner table. It wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't a gray area he could argue in good faith. It had an expiration date typed in 10-point font on a page he had personally watched me sign. I called him anyway, 11:40 at night, and he picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting for it. Elise, is Rose all right? Denise and I have been worried sick. She's fine. No thanks to you. I kept my voice level, the way I do in a closing when a buyer's agent tries to slide a bad number past me, and I need them to hear that I noticed without giving them the satisfaction of watching me react. I have the work order, Dad. Red line lock and key. Your name. Typed. Under authorized by. A pause, just half a second too long. It's just a key, Elise. It's not... Nobody was trying to hurt anyone. It was supposed to be quick, in and out, before you even got home from my house? Before I got home. So you knew I wasn't there. You knew Grandma was there alone. I thought she'd be napping. I didn't think... He stopped himself, and I heard Denise's voice somewhere behind him, low, telling him something I couldn't make out. Look, it's a family matter. You and I can sit down and talk about the unit like adults, without lawyers and police reports. We don't need to blow this up into something. What unit conversation is there to have? It's mine. It's been mine for 6 years. There's no ownership question, Dad. There's a deed. There's history there too, Elise. You know your grandmother's not going to be around to take care of that place forever. And Denise has been wanting somewhere closer to the city for the boys. And I thought if we just talked about it like a family instead of you making it into a whole legal thing. I sat very still on my kitchen stool because I understood, finally, in his own words, out of his own mouth, what this had actually been about the entire time. Not a spare key, not confusion, a plan, discussed at home probably more than once, to move Denise Holt and her sons into my grandmother's future absence and my present ownership, using a piece of paper that had expired 62 months ago as if it were still warm. You used an expired power of attorney to authorize a locksmith to break into an occupied home, I said, a home where my grandmother was alone. And your stepson tried to physically force his way through a chain door while she was inside it. He didn't force anything, and the chain must have already been loose. There's a police report that says otherwise. There's a dog bite report that says otherwise. And there's a filing at the county, Dad, from September, denied, and another one from 4 days ago. Also denied, both under your name, both trying to get yourself added as an authorized contact on a unit you have no legal interest in. I have copies of both. The silence on the other end of the line went on long enough that I thought he'd hung up. You've been keeping tabs on me, he finally said, and there was something almost wounded in it, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I closed titles for a living before I ever knew I'd need to use those skills on my own father, I said. I didn't go looking for this. You put it in a public filing. Anyone could have found it. I just happened to be the one who checked. I hung up before he could answer, because I could feel the conversation sliding toward the place. These conversations always slide toward with him. An argument about tone, about my attitude, about how hard this must be for him too. And I didn't have the patience left in me that night to referee my own father's feelings about getting caught. At 6 the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, I called the property management office at Delancey Tower and got the after-hours line, which routes to the building's general manager on a rotating basis during holiday week. Her name is Carla Nunes, and she has run that building for 11 years. And when I explained who I was and what had happened overnight, she went quiet for a second and then said something that settled the last piece of that night into place. Ms. Marchetti, I need to be honest with you, and I probably should have called you myself back in September instead of just turning your father away and letting it drop. We logged his visit. We logged the paperwork he tried to submit, the same limited POA, expired. We noted that right on the intake form. And we logged a phone call 4 days ago, this past Sunday, from a woman who didn't give her full name, asking whether a unit owner's family member could authorize a rekey without the owner present if they had, quote, old paperwork on file. We told her no. I didn't think to connect the two calls to what happened last night. But Ms. Marchetti, I think that woman was checking whether your father's paperwork would work before your stepbrother ever picked up that locksmith's kit. I asked her to email me everything. The September intake form, the internal call log from Sunday, anything with a timestamp. And she said she'd have it to me by 9, copied to the board president, because in her words, this isn't just your problem anymore, this is a building security problem, and the board is going to want to see every piece of it before the next meeting. I hadn't even thought about the board yet. I would, within the hour, understand exactly how much that mattered. The family group chat started at 7:15 the morning after Thanksgiving, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. And by the time I sat down at my kitchen counter to read it properly, there were 41 messages waiting. Most of them from people who hadn't called either me or my grandmother once in the 12 hours since a dog had torn into my stepbrother's arm on our behalf. Aunt Carol started it. Can we please not do this over the holiday weekend? It was an accident. Nobody got seriously hurt. Families disagree. This doesn't need police involved. My cousin Danny, who I hadn't spoken to since his own wedding, chimed in underneath her. Tyler's still pretty shaken up. Maybe everybody just needs to cool off. And then Denise herself, 3 messages in a row, each one a little more pointed than the last, ending with, "I think it's a shame Elise is choosing to make this a legal matter instead of a family conversation. My son could have been seriously injured." I let that one sit on my screen for a long moment. Her son had used a key he had no right to, and a story about board authorization to get himself and a locksmith into an occupied unit with a chain latch engaged. And in the version of the story circulating among people who hadn't been there, I was the one escalating. I didn't respond in the group chat. I don't do my best work in a group chat, and I have learned, closing hundreds of real estate transactions, that the person who stays calmest in a room full of people trying to rush a decision is usually the person who ends up holding the paperwork that matters. I called my grandmother's room instead, even though she was awake and 2 doors down, because I wanted to hear her voice before I did anything else that day. She was already up, already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with Bruno's head resting on her knee and her own phone face down beside her coffee cup. "I saw the messages," she said before I could ask. "Your Aunt Carol has always had more opinions than backbone. Don't let her talk you into feeling guilty for something that happened to me in my own front hall." "Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before you answer." "Go ahead. Did Dad ever say anything to you? Anything at all, over the last few months, about the unit, about you, about what happens if something happened to you? Anything that sounded like planning instead of just talking?" She was quiet long enough that I knew the answer before she gave it. "At your cousin's christening in October, he asked me, sort of sideways, whether I'd thought about downsizing. I told him, I live with my granddaughter in a beautiful home, and I have no intention of downsizing anywhere." He laughed it off, said he was just checking in on me. This is why I love making these stories. People think silence means weakness until the proof is already in the room. Stay with me. We're right at that point. He laughed it off, said he was just checking in on me. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I didn't think much of it at the time. I think about it differently this morning. That was the moment I stopped hearing my father's version of events as confusion or overreach and started hearing it as a timeline. October. The sideways question about downsizing. Some point after that, a decision made with Denise that my grandmother's presence in that unit, and eventually my absence at the wrong hour, was an obstacle with a solution. September's rejected filing. Sunday's phone call checking whether old paperwork still worked. Thursday's dinner, the whisper, the locksmith already booked and waiting. I drove out to Redline Lock and Key myself that afternoon instead of waiting for a callback, because some things are faster to close out in person, and because I wanted to look the technician in the eye when he told me who booked that job. The shop was a single unit in a strip mall 2 towns over, closed for the holiday except for the owner, a heavyset man named Gary, who came out from the back when the bell over the door rang and looked immediately uncomfortable when I introduced myself. "Look, I already talked to the police this morning," he said. "I don't want any trouble." The job came in over the phone Wednesday. Guy said he was the property owner's father, said he had power of attorney, said he'd meet us there or send someone to let us in since he had a family thing. My guy Rick took the job. Standard Reiki, nothing weird about the call itself. We get family authorizations all the time. Elderly parent, kid takes over the lease, that kind of thing. We asked for documentation on site, and the gentleman who called said he'd email a copy of the authorization ahead of the appointment. Did he? Gary pulled up something on the shop's tablet, turned it around so I could see. An email sent Wednesday night, 11:04 p.m., from an address I recognized instantly as my father's personal account, subject line authorization, Unit 4001 Delancey, and attached to it, scanned in a slightly crooked photograph clearly taken with a phone camera on a kitchen table, was the exact same limited power of attorney I'd pulled out of my own lockbox the night before. Same notary stamp, same expiration paragraph, typed in 10-point font, visible in the photo if you knew to look for it. Which Gary's technician Rick, 24 years old and working a holiday shift for time and a half, evidently hadn't. Can you forward that to me? And can I get a written statement from Rick about what he was told on site, verbally, before the job started? Yeah. Yeah, of course. Ma'am, for what it's worth, Rick feels awful. He said the guy who let him up seemed nervous the whole time, kept looking at his phone, kept saying they needed to hurry. I got the statement in writing before I left, dated and signed, describing Tyler pacing the hallway, checking the time, saying more than once that they needed to be quick because everyone's at dinner. Combined with the email, the photographed POA, and the expiration date sitting in plain sight the whole time, it was no longer a story about a family misunderstanding. It was a documented, time-stamped, six-source paper trail. The original POA and its true expiration, the two prior county filings, denied. Sunday's phone call to the building, Wednesday night's email with the same expired document attached. Rick's signed statement and the building's own fob and access logs showing exactly when Tyler badged into the lobby alone for the first time in 8 months of visiting me as a guest. I stopped by the management office on my way home and asked Carla to pull that fob log formally, in writing, with timestamps down to the second. She had it printed before I finished my coffee in her office. Tyler Holt, guest fob issued March 14th, associated with Unit 4001, previous 4 uses, all between 6 and 9 p.m., on dates matching dinners I remembered hosting. Always with me badging in first. Thursday's use, 4:51 p.m., alone, no companion badge, 40 minutes before the timestamp on Redline's own service ticket for arrival. I'm forwarding all of this to the board, Carla said, not asking permission, which told me exactly how seriously the building was taking it. Ms. Marchetti, I want to be straightforward with you. This isn't just a tenant dispute anymore. Somebody used forged adjacent authorization, an expired legal document represented as current, to attempt access to an occupied unit in this building, and it happened on my watch, twice, once in September and once successfully enough to get a locksmith through the lobby. The board is going to want an emergency session. I'd rather you hear that from me than find a message waiting on Monday. The email came through 40 minutes later. Emergency board session. Security incident, Unit 4001, Tuesday, 6 p.m., building conference room on the second floor. Attendance requested, unit owner, involved parties as applicable, building council. I read it twice, sitting in my car in the management office parking lot, and felt something in my chest that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite dread. Something closer to the specific, steady feeling I get in a closing room when every document on the table finally lines up the same direction. My father had spent 2 months trying, quietly, through the building's own front door, to get his name attached to a home that was never his, and had been told no both times, in writing, by people with no personal stake in our family at all. When quiet hadn't worked, he'd sent someone else's son through a chain door instead. On a night he thought no one but an elderly woman would be standing in the way. Now the building itself was calling the meeting, not me, them. I texted my grandmother the date and time, and her reply came back within a minute, 5 words that told me she'd already been thinking the exact same thing I had, sitting alone at that kitchen table with Bruno's head on her knee. Bring the folder. Bring all of it. The conference room at Delancey Tower is on the second floor, glass-walled, overlooking the pool deck that's covered for winter, and by 5:50 on Tuesday every chair around the long table was full except 2. I sat between my grandmother and Priya, who had come as a favor, and, I suspected, because she wanted to see how this ended after 2 nights of pulling filings for me on her own time. Carla Nunes sat at the head of the table with a folder in front of her thicker than mine. Board President Howard Ellery, a retired federal auditor who has lived on the 18th floor for 9 years and takes minutes personally instead of trusting anyone else to get them right, sat to her left with a legal pad already half-filled in tight, precise handwriting. Building counsel, a sharp young attorney named Priscilla Ostro, sat with a laptop open and a single manila folder squared perfectly in front of her. My father and Denise came in at 6:01, 1 minute late, and I watched him do the thing he does in rooms he doesn't control. Scan for the friendliest face, find none, and settle for a tight, practiced smile aimed at nobody in particular. Tyler wasn't with them. Denise had left him home, which told me something too. Either she'd decided he'd already said enough to a police officer and a locksmith's technician, or she didn't trust what he'd say under this much scrutiny with his own bandaged arm as a visual aid. "Thank you all for coming," Howard said, and there was no warmth in it, only the flat courtesy of a man running a meeting he wished he didn't have to run. "This is an emergency board session called under Section 11 of the building bylaws regarding a security incident on the 40th floor. Ms. Nunez will summarize the timeline. Then we'll hear from the unit owner. Then, Mr. Marchetti, you'll have the opportunity to respond. This is not a courtroom. It is a residents' association, and our only interest tonight is the safety of this building and its residents. Ms. Nunez." Carla walked the timeline in the same flat, careful voice she'd used with me on the phone the morning after. The September visit and rejected intake form. The Sunday phone call asking about old paperwork. Wednesday's email to Redline Lock and Key with the scanned power of attorney attached. Thursday's fob log showing Tyler badging in alone at 4:51. The locksmith's arrival 40 minutes later. The responding officer's report. The evidence bag containing the work order with my father's typed name under authorized by. She placed a printed copy of each document on the table as she named it, sliding them down toward the center where everyone could see, until there was a small, precise stack sitting exactly between my father's seat and mine. "Mr. Marchetti," Howard said, "would you like to respond?" My father cleared his throat, straightened his tie the way he had at his own dinner table 2 nights earlier. "I think this whole thing has gotten wildly out of proportion. I had a power of attorney for that unit. I was under the impression it was still valid. I was trying to help arrange some routine maintenance while my daughter was tied up with a work commitment, and it turned into a misunderstanding that I deeply regret, especially that my mother was frightened. The document is dated with an explicit 12-month expiration clause," Priscilla Ostro said, not looking up from her laptop. "It expired more than 5 years ago. That language is on the first page, in the same font as the rest of the document. Are you telling this board you were unaware of that clause, despite having personally executed and relied on that document, and despite the county recorder's office rejecting your attempt to use it in September and again 4 days ago? I didn't draft the paperwork. I'm not a lawyer. I thought you emailed a photograph of that exact document, expiration clause, visible to a locksmith on Wednesday night, 11:04 p.m., Carla said, sliding that page forward too. Described yourself as the property owner's father with current authorization. That's not a misunderstanding about a clause you might have missed. That's using a document you'd already been told twice in writing was no longer valid." Denise leaned forward. "This is a family situation being turned into a witch hunt. Elise, you could have just called your father and asked him to explain himself instead of bringing the police and now a board meeting into it." "I did call him," I said. It was the first thing I'd said since sitting down, and I kept my voice at the same level I use across a closing table when a deal is trying to slide sideways. "Thursday night before 11. He told me it was just a key. He told me it was a family matter, that we should talk about it without lawyers, that Grandma wasn't going to be around forever to take care of the unit, and that you wanted somewhere closer to the city for your sons." I let that sit in the room for a second before I went on. "That's not a misunderstanding about a maintenance visit. That's a plan. And he told me the shape of it himself, out loud, over the phone, the same night your son ran through my hallway bleeding." My father's jaw tightened. I never said it like that. I have the call in my phone's log with the exact timestamp, and I can tell this board, under oath if it comes to that, precisely what was said," I said. "But I'd rather this board hear it from the person who was actually inside that apartment when the door came open." Every head at the table turned toward my grandmother. Rose Whitfield sat up a little straighter, the way she does when she's decided a moment matters enough to meet it properly, and set both hands flat on the table in front of her, the same steady gesture she'd used in her own wingback chair 2 nights before. "I'm 81 years old," she said, "and I have known Warren since he was younger than that boy of yours who came through my door with a locksmith. Since before he ever married my daughter, God rest her, and long before he married you. I recognized his stepson's voice through 6 inches of chain door before I ever saw his face. I heard him tell the man with the tools that his father had already cleared it with the board, which was a lie, because I am sitting here tonight and nobody cleared anything with anyone. I was not confused. I was not asleep. I was in my own kitchen with the radio on when a man I have fed pie to for 12 years put his shoulder into my front door while I was alone inside it." She looked at my father, not raising her voice at all, which made it land harder than shouting would have. "Warren, I have loved you like a son since before your daughter was old enough to walk. I am telling this room, calmly, that what happened Thursday was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan that only failed because I did not open that chain and because I keep a dog you have never once asked the name of." The room was silent long enough that I heard the building's heating system click on somewhere behind the walls. Howard Ellery set down his pen. "Mr. Marchetti, does the board have your acknowledgement that the power of attorney you relied on for this action was expired at the time of its use, and that the building had previously and explicitly denied your request to be added as an authorized party for this unit?" My father didn't answer for a long moment. Denise's hand found his arm, and whatever she murmured to him, I couldn't hear it, but I recognized the shape of it from Thursday night. The same low, fast instruction. He pulled his arm away from her, which surprised me more than almost anything else that happened in that room. "Yes," he said finally quietly. "The document was expired. I knew there was a question about it. I should have handled this differently." "Thank you," Howard said, in the tone of a man closing a file, not accepting an apology. "This board's authority extends to building access and security policy, not criminal matters, but given the documentation before us, a forced entry attempt on an occupied unit involving a dog bite injury, a fraudulently represented expired legal instrument, and 2 prior denied attempts at unauthorized access. I am formally directing Ms. Nunes to submit a full incident package to the County District Attorney's Office and to the responding precinct, supplementing the existing police report. I am also directing that Mr. Marchetti's guest privileges at this building be permanently revoked, effective tonight, and that Tyler Holt's guest fob be deactivated and flagged in the building's access system. You're going to press this into a criminal matter over a family disagreement," my father said. And for the first time that night, his voice cracked with something that sounded almost like fear instead of authority. "I'm not pressing anything, Mr. Marchetti," Howard said. "I'm forwarding documented facts to the people whose job it is to decide what they mean. That decision was made the moment you emailed an expired legal document to a locksmith and sent someone through a chain door while an elderly resident was alone inside. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I sat with my grandmother's hand in mine under the table, watching my father search the faces around that table one more time for somewhere friendly to land, and finding, for the second time in 3 days, absolutely nowhere. The district attorney's office called me 11 days later. Not my father, not the board, a paralegal officer Reyes had put me in touch with, named Marisol Ferrer, who walked me through what the file had become once it left Delancey Tower's conference room. Tyler was charged with attempted unlawful entry, a misdemeanor given his clean record and the fact that no property had actually left the unit, and offered a pretrial diversion program that would clear the charge from his record after a year of no further incidents, restitution for the doorframe, and a formal no-contact order barring him from the building. He took the deal without a fight, according to Marisol, and didn't contest a single fact in the file. My father was a different matter, because he wasn't the one who physically entered, and because the county recorder had no criminal statute covering a rejected filing. The DA's office declined to charge him directly, but Priscilla Ostro filed a civil complaint on the building's behalf for trespass and property damage to the door frame, naming both my father and Tyler, and forwarded a formal notice to the State Notary Oversight Board questioning whether the original power of attorney notarization had been properly witnessed, given how casually it had apparently been treated in the years since. None of that undid the 2 gouges in my doorframe, which I had repaired the week after Thanksgiving, or the 11 stitches Tyler needed in his forearm, which I did not feel 1 ounce of guilt about because a dog does exactly what it's trained to do and stops exactly when it's told to stop. And Bruno had stopped the second the officers arrived and identified themselves. What it did undo was any question anywhere, in any office that keeps records, about whose name belongs on the deed to 4001 Delancey. I didn't speak to my father again until the week before Christmas, and only because my grandmother asked me to drive her to his house so she could say something to him in person and that she didn't want to say over the phone. I waited in the car. She was inside for 11 minutes. When she came back out, she didn't tell me what she'd said, and I didn't ask because some conversations belong to the person who has the right to have them, and this one was hers, not mine. I know only that she came out standing straighter than she'd stood in weeks, and that she didn't cry once on the drive home. Though I caught her looking out the window for a long time somewhere around the Millbrook exit. Denise texted me once, in early December, a single message that read, "I hope you're happy." And I didn't answer it because I wasn't looking for happiness out of any of this. I was looking for my grandmother to be able to sleep in her own bedroom with the door unlocked and the radio on, the way she likes it, without wondering whether the next key in the lock would be one she recognized. The notary board's inquiry took longer to resolve than the criminal matter, which surprised me at first and then didn't, once I understood how these things actually move. The notary who'd witnessed my signature that spring, a woman named Yolanda Briggs, who still worked out of a shipping and notary storefront near my old apartment, was asked to produce her signing log from the spring I flew to Singapore. And when she did, it showed exactly what the document itself already said. A single signature, a single date, a witnessed and correctly executed limited authorization with a plainly stated expiration. Nothing forged, nothing altered. The paper had told the truth from the very beginning. It was only ever the man holding it who hadn't. Marcus stopped me in the lobby a few days before Christmas, off shift, out of uniform, waiting for a rideshare in the cold rather than heading straight home, and told me he'd wanted to say something in person instead of over text. "I've worked this desk 6 years," he said, "and I've led a lot of people's family up on a lot of holidays without thinking twice, because that's the job. That's supposed to be the easy part. I'm not going to do that anymore. Not for anybody, not even people I like. I'm sorry it took your grandmother getting scared for me to learn that." I told him it wasn't his mistake to carry, and I meant it, but I also didn't stop him from apologizing, because I understood he needed to say it as much as I needed to hear it. She can. That part I know for certain, because I hear the radio through the wall most Thursday afternoons, the same old station, and Bruno sleeping across her threshold instead of mine most nights now, which the trainer who placed him with her told me is exactly what a retired working dog does once it decides a person is actually his to guard. I had the building's smart access system updated the same week as the board meeting. Not because the old brass lock had failed me. It hadn't. 105 pounds of Belgian Malinois had done that job better than any lock could. But because Carla suggested it, and because I liked the idea of a system that keeps its own honest record instead of relying on anyone's memory or anyone's word, the app on my phone now shows exactly who has access to 4001 Delancey and exactly when they used it. Me, my grandmother, Marcus, at the front desk, for emergencies only, and nobody else. No guest fobs issued without my direct approval, logged with a photograph and a timestamp, permanent, searchable, mine to review whenever I want. I framed the deed. It sounds like a small thing, And for 6 years, it wasn't something I'd ever thought to do. It lived in the lockbox with everything else that mattered. Useful, unglamorous, filed. But I had a slim black frame made for it the week after the board meeting. And I hung it in the front hallway, right where you'd see it stepping through the door. Right where a person standing in that hallway with a locksmith's kit and an expired piece of paper would have had to look past it to get any further into my home. On the Sunday before Christmas, my grandmother and I sat at the kitchen counter with 2 cups of coffee, going cold between us. Bruno stretched out across the doorway like he still hadn't fully decided the danger was over, and she reached over and tapped the edge of the frame deed where I'd propped it against the wall before hanging it, tracing the line that read Elise R. Marchetti, a single woman with 1 finger. "Your Aunt Carol told you buying this place alone was a mistake," she said. I remember that dinner. I remember thinking at the time that maybe she had a point, that it might be lonely, a young woman rattling around a place like this by herself. And now? She looked past me, toward the hallway, toward the deed catching the morning light in its new frame, toward the dog who had chosen, on his own, which one of us was his to protect. "Now I think the 2 of us have exactly the family we built ourselves," she said, "and I think that's worth a great deal more than the one we were given." I got up and hung the deed properly that afternoon. Level, centered, a small brass nail I drove myself with the same steady hand I use every day at a closing table, and stepped back to look at it. My name, alone, exactly where it belonged, exactly where it had always belonged. Now impossible for anyone standing in that hallway to miss. I'm Clara, and this is my channel. I love making these stories and sharing them with people across the world. If this one found you at the right time, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.